In the 1950s and 60s, the markers of young adult success were things like having a steady union job, a mortgage on a home, and a pension waiting for you at 65. In 2025, your average 20-something-year-old is paying $2,000 a month in rent to share an apartment the size of a shoebox, or still living with their parents because they can't afford their own place, all the while trying to soothe their chronic anxiety with the 12-step skincare routine that they saw on TikTok. Home ownership used to be a rite of passage, but now it's a pipe dream. And in its place, hauls, skincare, a new gimmicky calming face mask with lavender oil to romanticize your depression. Both millennials and Gen Z were priced out of anything that built actual wealth, so we reached for what was left. Consumer goods dressed up in the aesthetic of wealth. When you don't know if you'll ever own a home or feel secure in your job, a restocked fridge can feel like one of the few attainable symbols of having it together. You can't afford a house, but you can afford a haul. Let's talk about how retail therapy became a stand-in for structure, safety, and self-worth. The Great Depression generation and post-World War II boomers benefited from FDR's New Deal, which built public infrastructure and safety nets like affordable housing programs, Social Security, unemployment insurance, and labor protections. Unions were strong. They helped to secure middle-class wages even for those who didn't have a college degree. Of course, not everyone in the 50s and 60s were entitled to these benefits. It's important to note that these were not equally distributed. Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities were often excluded. The New Deal was not nearly enough. Imperialism was still doing its big one, okay? Collective liberation was far from being fully realized in its global sense. These benefits were concessions at best, very important to note. They did not wholly address the economic precarity of capitalism. But the point is that even the idea of some forms of collective support that actually helped people to ascend to the middle class and have secure lives have largely disappeared. Everything has now been privatized and individualized. In this new paradigm in the post-Reagan/Thatcher/Clinton austerity measure era, consumption itself has been sold as a form of agency. And we've talked about this before. Instead of agitating for higher wages, instead of agitating for affordable housing, instead of using a collective approach to advocate for systems change, people are encouraged to express their freedom and identity through purchasing frivolous goods. If you want a better life, you just need to buy more stuff, and not stuff that are actually substantive, but things that are ephemeral, things that are easily accessible that you can just order on Amazon, those kinds of stuff. Even if you have to take on thousands of dollars in debt to get it. Every solution offered is individualistic. What looks like choice is really the narrowing of our lives into what capitalism allows us to have access to. A lot of us millennials, we were raised on the promise that if we worked hard enough, that we could achieve the same success as our parents' generation did and our grandparents' generation did. But younger Americans are worse off than their parents and grandparents, and no, not because of their purchasing of frivolous goods. In the 60s and 70s and even the early 80s, purchasing a starter home was attainable on an average income. Today, a 20% down payment costs nearly 85% of a millennial's household yearly income. College tuition has exploded 169% since 1980. I mean, a summer job used to be able to cover a whole year's worth of tuition. Now it barely covers your textbooks. And the economic landscape has largely shifted from long-term employment to the gig economy. Previous generations could expect to work for the same employer for 30 to 40 years and expect to retire with a pension and a gold watch to boot. In the 1950s, roughly 1/3 of Americans belonged to a union, which of course is key to having job security and bargaining power to be able to ask for a raise, and actually get it, to have better working conditions, etc. But by 2024, that number had dropped to just 9.9%, which was the lowest rate ever recorded. And so the decline of unions has meant less bargaining power for workers, fewer benefits, more at-will employment, where of course you can quit on your own volition. but you could also be fired on your boss's whim. Also, pensions, which is guaranteed income when you retire, that the company that you work for takes on all of the risk for, they have largely disappeared as well. In 1980, 46% of private sector workers had a pension plan, but by 2024, only 15% did. Employers have largely switched to 401ks where you're subject to the whims of the market. And so add to that the rise of freelancing work, gig work, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash. And it's caused young workers to have to juggle multiple gigs with no healthcare, no paid leave, no benefits. And so you're living in an economy that has systematically disinvested from your generation's stability. And so what do you reach for? What do you have to dream for? What do you have to aspire to? All of these anxieties are constantly buzzing in young people's minds. And so is it any wonder then that shopping, a much more accessible way to actually own things, has replaced these more structural, longer-term forms of ownership and liberation? We talk about this often, how in the comments of a lot of these haul videos and restock videos, we always see people commenting saying how aspirational this is, how I wish this was me and I can't wait until I can have all of these stuff. And why is that aspirational? Why is such low-hanging fruit, to borrow a term from corporate America, aspirational? Is this all we can dream of? I think that buying superficial things has become the dream because anything substantive has been taken off the table. If you can't build a future, at least you can buy an aesthetic, right? The well-stocked fridge, I feel, is a security blanket to ward off this gnawing sense of precarity that defines so much of young adulthood today. I believe that's why people like to watch content like this. And I think this is why we're seeing so much of Gen Z clinging to childhood. The I'm just a girl trend where women are infantilizing themselves. And now with the rise of these ridiculous Labubu dolls, which are these really goofy looking dolls that people, grown adults in fact, are purchasing in droves. They're using them as accessories on their purses and stuff. And you guessed it, they're camping outside of stores for them for hours and hours. Where have we seen this before? Yet again, adults are chasing after these ephemeral products and a toy no less. I feel like this is a way to self-soothe maybe because the real adult world has stripped so many adults of that feeling of safety. Physician and addiction expert Dr. Gabor argues that many behaviors we don't traditionally label as addictions actually function like drug habits. He says, yes, there's the addiction to drugs, but there's also the addiction to consumerism. There is the addiction to sex, to the internet, to shopping. According to Mate, what we really seek in these habits is relief from pain, a sense of peace or comfort or control that our daily lives fail to provide. In a society where young people cycle through soul-sucking jobs and they have to carry this almost psychic weight of constant bad news, it is no wonder that they turn to shopping as an opiate, as relief from that. And never before has shopping been so easy as one swipe away. Shopping is like this brief escape hatch, and that rush of opening up a new package or seeing your pantry that's full of goodies, it's stimulating these feelings that things are okay, at least for a little while. Mate uses the Buddhist concept of hungry ghosts to describe our condition. He says that these ghosts have very large empty bellies and tiny mouths, and they can never fill their emptiness no matter how much they consume. I think the hungry void can come from a lot of sources of trauma, be it childhood trauma or the chronic insecurity of living in late stage capitalism. I think what we often refer to as trauma is capitalism doing what it's meant to do, to extract, to exhaust, and to isolate us. And consumer culture is all too happy to step in as your faux therapist to relieve that trauma. Of course, the feeling is always, always, always fleeting. It's a shop, rinse, repeat cycle. But, compulsive shopping is a socially sanctioned addiction though, right? It's actively encouraged, it's available 24/7, and it does not carry the same stigma as substances, as alcohol. You're not gonna get a stage intervention from wanting to get high off of a Target haul to take the edge off the long work week, the draining work week that you just had. But the emotional drivers that are underlying can be similar to that of actually using substances. Mate says, quote, "The essence of capitalism is to separate the mind from the body. And basically, people are all considered material goods. People matter only insofar as they can produce, consume, or own matter. If you don't produce, consume, or own matter, then you don't matter in society. You know, whenever we have conversations about the reasons why young people struggle, there's always some pundit that trots out this same tired old excuse or myth to blame the victims, right? They say young people today are only broke because they overspend and they don't know how to manage their money. And I think obviously this is a much easier explanation to someone who's not inclined to study things from a sociological point of view. On the surface, that maybe sounds right to a myopic mind, but it doesn't take into account the ways in which the economic system is already rigged against young people. Yes, some people do make misguided financial choices, but so do rich people. I mean, you don't need a fifth yacht if you can't afford to pay your workers. Billions of dollars in wage theft happens every single year from corporations. That is not the best financial decision either, but we don't see them getting the same flack, do we? Absolutely not. But yeah, of course, young people are going to make poor financial decisions and it happens, but the difference is that they just don't have the cushion to actually soften their fall. They don't have the safety nets that previous generations had, that they could afford to screw up because, by the way, your brain is not fully developed. You're going to make bad decisions across the board. And so young people are punished more harshly for every misstep that they make because there's far less margin for error. There is no cheap rent in the city that you work in. You don't own a home outright. You're not building equity on anything. Private equity is gobbling up everything, in fact. Let's talk about the actual spending patterns of young people today. Millennials and Gen Z have to allocate a far higher part of their income to essentials than previous generations did. Essentials like housing and education, etc. For housing alone, the median renter household in 1960 spent less than a fifth of their income on rent. And by 2022, housing costs consumed 31% of the median renter's income. The median rent is up by 75% over these past 6 decades, and the median renter income has risen by just 15%. And that's not even taking into account the high cost of other essentials like groceries and other odds and ends that you need to survive. In 1965, the median home price was just $20,200, which is $202,215 when adjusted for inflation, versus the current median home price of $420,000, give or take. And so comfort spending is often a response to systemic deprivation, not the cause of it. I can see why you would order a new outfit to make you feel better, to make you feel secure in a world that makes you feel anything but. And also important to note, there are over 340 million Americans. Everyone is not doing the same thing. Everyone doesn't have the same experience. Many Americans skip brunch, they skip shopping excursions, and they still can't afford to live. You can budget every day until your fingers bleed, but if you're not being paid enough, all of that is never going to be enough to survive off of. But yeah, those who do comfort spend, for a lot of them, I believe it is a source of temporary agency. It makes them feel empowered or like they have some form of agency, or it's a form of self-soothing in a world where they otherwise feel marginalized. And I've talked about this at length in other videos, so I won't belabor it too much here, but also the disinvestment in community, where people are encouraged to pursue individualistic solutions like calling an Uber to pick you up from the airport rather than calling a friend to pick you up, all of which has made us more primed for forming parasocial relationships with influencers who encourage hyperconsumerism. Influencers promote these excessive lifestyles, some of whom are also struggling and pretending to be rich online, others who are actually rich and are able to afford to promote these gluttonous lifestyles to others who are feeling empty, as though shopping is going to permanently solve all of their problems. And so no, consumption on the part of the person who's being influenced by is not the entire crime. It's a symptom. The real robbery happened when public goods were privatized, when unions were busted, when wages were frozen, and when austerity was sold to us as fiscal responsibility, when buying frivolous goods was sold to us as freedom. And trust me, I can relate to that feeling. Back in like 2017, I was working this soul-sucking job, and I would go down to the Marshalls like almost every week not actually having anything in mind to purchase, just to browse, just to feel something, just to have something to look forward to. I would go down to the Marshalls on Delaware Avenue in Buffalo. Those of you guys who've lived in Buffalo, I don't live there anymore, but I lived there for many years. That Delaware Avenue Marshalls, by the Nail Depot. If you're a Buffalonian and you happen to be watching, comment down below. But yes, I would go down to that Marshalls all the time just to have something to look forward to. Strolling through those aisles at the time was one of the very few things that gave me joy. I would walk around those aisles and I would convince myself that, yeah, I really need that throw pillow. I really need those kitchen supplies. I really need those yoga pants. Okay. I did that because I was living this life where the mundane was like so repetitious in my life. Having this mundane job was so repetitious in my life. I needed something new. I needed the novelty of having new items in my life to make me feel good. Just to make me feel like I had some kind of control over my day. Just to make me feel like I was rewarding myself for surviving another work week. And for a while, it worked. Kind of. It gave me a thrill. But after a year or so of doing that, I started to realize that I did not need another throw pillow. I did not need more kitchen supplies that I was only going to use once and discard of. What I needed was to restructure my entire life. I needed time. I needed purpose. I needed stability. I needed a job that didn't make me feel like I needed to disassociate every Friday or every weekend or during my lunch breaks. I needed better working conditions, but the system does not offer those things easily. So we settle for the throw pillows. We settle for the kitchen gadgets that some influencer on TikTok told us was a must-have because they're more affordable, they're more attainable than the things that we actually need. I was spending more money just to cope. And so that's a lot of us. You spend more money on that extra bottle of wine just to recover from a soul-sucking work week. You spend more money having a shopping spree at Marshall's to feel like you have something to look forward to. A little treat after suffering from a 40 or 50 or 60-hour work week. You spend more on takeout because you're too mentally drained to cook something for yourself after a long work week. You spend more on that influencer recommended product that you didn't know that you needed 2 minutes ago because having a package on your doorstep, seeing that UPS truck arrive in front of your house, it sparks joy in a life where feeling joy is so out of reach. You're spending more because the system took everything else. We lost pensions and got package deliveries. What we used to build together, we're now told to buy alone. You don't have a pension, you don't have a union, your healthcare is tied to your job, you have no real job security, you have no real bargaining power, you have no real structural safety net in life, right? You're working in this top-down work environment where you have no real say over anything and you don't own the means to production. So of course, people are going to turn to hyper-consumerism because that's the only thing that they can feasibly own.
Long ago, capitalists learned to associate in your mind through the images and pictures they present. The notion that the needs you have, some of your deepest needs for love, for admiration, for appreciation, can be met by buying this or buying that. Capitalism needs to keep selling. Every capitalist's nightmare is to produce stuff in the factory and then be unable to sell it. You're not popular, by this, you will be. You're not loved, by this, you will be. You're not happy, by this, you will be. Endlessly over and over.
But here's what I will always say. That does not mean you have to fold into it. You can still fight it with every fiber of your being. And it is hard sometimes. It's hard when you can just reach for your phone and buy that product to make you temporarily feel better in a couple of clicks and a couple of swipes. It is so easy. And it's hard to fight through that feeling sometimes, but you have to fight it with every fiber in your being, both at a collective level and a personal level. You try to unionize your workplace. You build solidarity with your coworkers instead of competing with them. A great friend of mine, they are such an amazing human being because we previously worked together, and on my first day working there, they told me their salary and how much they were making and told me that I wasn't being paid enough and that they were willing to advocate on my behalf that we both receive the same pay because we had the same job title. That's what solidarity looks like. You start rejecting the mindset that your only value is as a consumer. You are a whole human being that's worthy of dignity, of solidarity, and of security. Shopping should be an errand, not therapy. We need better wages. Absolutely, we need cheaper housing. We need single-payer healthcare, all the things. But more importantly, we need a total shift in who holds all the power and who makes the decisions and who reaps the benefits of our labor. So yes, overconsumption is a symptom to deprivation. However, that symptom is infecting our minds, our bodies, our souls, and the planet. So we cannot keep coping this way. We have tried to fix the system. We've tried coping inside of it, but at some point, we need to stop trying to reorganize furniture in a burning house. We need safety in a structural sense, not safety nets that can be dangled in front of our eyes like a carrot and then pulled away when it's no longer convenient. And so we have to deprogram ourselves from these mindsets of consumption as an opiate, and we have to dismantle these oppressive systems piece by piece. We cannot settle for being able to have a skincare haul or a Sephora haul. That's not going to cut it. Let's have a healthcare haul. You get healthcare and you get healthcare and you get healthcare. Let's have a housing haul. You get a house and you get a house and you get a house. We have so much power than we think. The problem is a lack of class solidarity and a lack of class consciousness. And the minute that we achieve consciousness and understand that these things have been given to us to placate us in order to distract us from fighting for the real things, the real gains that we need in life, that is when we can extricate ourselves from this vicious cycle of overconsumption. Okay? And so that is all I've got for today. And definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on the current crisis of overconsumption with young people? What are your thoughts on Labubu dolls and how people are clinging to childhood in order to avoid the perils of adulthood? And any other thoughts you might have are all welcome. Definitely let me know. The conversation continues in the comments down below. And if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up. And if you really liked it and you want more content like this, then hit that subscribe button. And if you want to see what I'm up to outside of YouTube, you can follow me on my social media profiles down here. And you can also help to support my work by subscribing to my Patreon for $1.50 a month or $5 a month if you're feeling a little bit more generous. Helps to keep the lights on my channel and helps me to continue making content like this. And besides all that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you all next time.